Don't come home this year. Your sister doesn't want drama. Those were the exact words my mother said to me 3 days before Thanksgiving. And just like that, 27 years of trying to belong in my own family ended with a single sentence that didn't even bother to pretend it cared about me. So I spent Thanksgiving alone, not at home, not with friends, but at a small restaurant in downtown Boston, sitting at a table meant for two, while surrounded by families who passed plates and laughed like belonging was something they'd never had to fight for. And I had no idea that the strangers at the table next to me, the ones who noticed I kept checking my phone even though it never lit up, would invite me to join them, and I definitely had no idea that 5 years later, those same strangers would be introduced at my wedding as the parents of the bride while my biological parents stood in the back of the room, uninvited to that moment, realizing too late that they had been replaced in every way that actually mattered. Before I go on, please take a moment to like and subscribe, but only if you genuinely connect with this story, and drop a comment. Where are you watching from, and what time is it there? My name is Hannah Whitmore, and I'm 31 years old, and I remember the exact second my phone rang that afternoon because I was standing in my tiny one-bedroom apartment, surrounded by grocery bags I had just unpacked, sweet potatoes, cranberry sauce, a turkey I had no idea how to cook but bought anyway because some part of me still believed I was going home, and when my mom's name flashed across the screen, I smiled without thinking because that's what I always did. I always smiled first, even when history had already taught me how these calls usually ended. Hey, Mom, I said, trying to sound light, trying to sound easy, trying to be the version of myself that didn't cause problems, the version they preferred, but her voice didn't match mine. It was flat, efficient, like she was calling to cancel a dentist appointment. Hannah, I need to tell you something. And the way she said it made my stomach drop before she even finished the sentence. Don't come home this year. Your sister doesn't want drama. And there was no explanation after that. No pause to soften it. No, we'll miss you. No, maybe next time. Just silence on her end, like the conversation was already over. Like the decision had been made long before she dialed my number. I actually laughed at first because it didn't make sense. What drama? I asked, gripping the phone a little tighter. I haven't even talked to Olivia in months, but that only made her tone sharper. Exactly, and let's keep it that way. She's pregnant again, and she doesn't need the stress. Stress. That word echoed in my head because the last time I checked, asking why I wasn't invited to her baby's shower wasn't stress. It was a question. But in my family, questions had always been treated like accusations, and I knew better than to push too hard. I knew what happened when I did. Mom, I already bought my ticket, I said quietly, staring at the confirmation email still open on my laptop, non-refundable, $347.80, money I had saved for 2 weeks just to afford the flight. Then get a refund, she replied, as if it were that simple, as if everything about me had always been that simple to them. A problem that could be canceled, rescheduled, erased. You understand, right? She added, but it wasn't really a question. It was a command disguised as one. And for a moment, I didn't say anything because I was trying to figure out what part of this I was supposed to understand. That my presence was optional, that my feelings were inconvenient, that my sister's comfort would always come before my existence. Yeah, I finally said, because that's what I always said, I understand. And the line went dead before I could change my mind, before I could say anything else, before I could ask the question I'd been carrying for years, but never had the courage to say out loud. Do you even want me there? I stood there for a long time after that, phone still in my hand, the apartment suddenly feeling smaller, quieter, like the walls had moved in just enough to remind me that I didn't belong anywhere else either. And I wish I could tell you that this was the first time something like this happened, that this was the moment everything changed, but the truth is, this was just the first time I stopped pretending it was normal, because growing up in my family meant learning early that love came with conditions, and I was never quite meeting them. When Olivia turned 16, my parents surprised her with a brand new Honda Civic, red bow on the hood, neighbors watching, photos posted everywhere. When I turned 16, I got her old laptop, the one with a cracked screen and a battery that lasted maybe 45 minutes if I was lucky. We can't afford 2 cars, my mom had said, and I nodded. Like it made sense, because I had already learned that fairness wasn't something we practiced. When Olivia got into Stanford, my parents threw a party with 60 guests, catered food, a banner that read "Future Doctor," even though she hadn't decided on a major yet. When I graduated nursing school with honors, they sent a text, "Congrats, proud of you." No call, no visit, just 23 characters that somehow managed to feel heavier than silence, and every time I noticed the difference, every time I tried to say something, it came back to the same response. Don't be so sensitive, Hannah. Or, why can't you just be happy for your sister? So I learned to be quiet. I learned to shrink. I learned to take up less space in a family that had already decided how much of me they were willing to keep, and standing there in my apartment, staring at a plane ticket I could no longer use, I realized something that settled into my chest like a quiet truth. There was no version of me that would ever be enough for them, no matter how easy I tried to be, no matter how small I made myself. And for the first time in my life, that realization didn't make me want to try harder. It made me want to stop trying altogether. Thanksgiving morning came cold and gray, the kind of day where the sky looks like it's holding something back, and I woke up to the sound of my neighbors laughing upstairs, footsteps, doors opening and closing, the unmistakable noise of a family gathering, and my phone stayed silent. No messages, no happy Thanksgiving, not even a missed call, and around noon, I made the mistake of opening Instagram. Olivia had posted a photo, the whole family around the table, my parents, Olivia, her husband, their toddler, all smiling like nothing was missing, like no one had been left out, and I counted the place settings without meaning to. 5 plates, 5 chairs, no empty seat, no space for me, not even the illusion of one. And that's when it hit me, they hadn't just excluded me, they had rewritten the story as if I was never part of it to begin with, and I closed the app, grabbed my coat, and made a decision that felt small at the time, but would end up changing everything. If I was going to spend Thanksgiving alone, I wasn't going to do it in the dark. I was going to go somewhere with light, somewhere with people, even if none of them knew my name. And that's how I ended up at that restaurant, sitting at that table, watching a family at the next table pass dishes back and forth like love was something you could just hand each other without thinking, and I didn't know it yet, but everything was about to change. I wish I could tell you that sitting in that restaurant was the hardest part, but it was not. The hardest part was realizing that nothing about what had just happened was new. It was just the first time it had been said out loud so clearly that I could not pretend it was anything else, because when I looked back, really looked back, I could see the patterns stretching all the way through my life, like a line I had been walking without questioning where it led. When I was 8 years old, my parents signed Olivia up for piano lessons at $200 a month, private instructor, weekly recitals, the whole thing. When I asked if I could try something too, maybe art or dance or anything that felt like mine, my mother smiled in that tight way she had and said, "Let's focus on your sister right now. She has real potential." And I remember nodding like that made sense even then. Even at 8, I understood that potential was something they believed belonged to her, not me. By the time we were in high school, the difference had numbers attached to it that were impossible to ignore. Olivia got a car worth $28,000 the week she turned 16, fully paid, insurance covered, gas card included. I got a bus pass that cost $48 a month, and a reminder to be grateful because at least I did not have to walk. When college acceptance letters came, Olivia chose a private university in California with tuition of $52,000 a year. My parents paid every cent without hesitation, housing, meal plan, even an extra $3,000 each semester for what my mother called living expenses. When I got into a state university nursing program, tuition was $21,000 a year. I remember sitting at the kitchen table with a calculator, showing them how it was less than half of what they were already paying, how with just a little help I could graduate without debt. My father did not even look at the numbers. He leaned back in his chair and said, "You're practical, Hannah, you can figure it out." And that was the end of the conversation. I took out loans, worked double shifts as a barista, making $12 an hour, sometimes closing at 11 at night and opening again at 5 in the morning, while Olivia posted pictures from study abroad in Italy, wine tastings, weekend trips to Paris, captions about finding herself. And every time I felt that familiar tightness in my chest, that question forming again, why not me? I swallowed it because I already knew what the answer would sound like. When Olivia graduated, my parents rented out a ballroom at a hotel downtown, 120 guests, catered dinner, a custom cake that cost $800, speeches, a photographer who followed her around all night capturing every smile like it was something historic. When I graduated, they sent flowers to my apartment, a bouquet that arrived 2 days late with a card that said, "Sorry we could not make it, proud of you." They had been at one of Olivia's networking events that weekend, something about an internship opportunity that could not be missed, and I told myself it was fine. I told Myself, it made sense, because that was the story I had been trained to tell, that everything they did had a reason, that every time I came second it was because she needed it more, but sitting in that restaurant, watching a father at the next table lean over and refill his daughter's glass. Without her even asking, laughing when she teased him about overfilling it, I realized something I had never allowed myself to say before. It was not about need, it was about choice. They chose her again and again, in ways big and small, in ways that added up over years until there was barely any space left for me at all. And the thing is, they never said we love her more. They did not have to. The numbers said it for them. The effort said it. The presence said it. The absence said it even louder. I remembered my 17th birthday. I had planned a small dinner with 2 friends, nothing big, just something that felt like mine. But that morning Olivia called crying because she had a disagreement with her boyfriend. And suddenly the entire day shifted. My parents canceled my dinner, took her out instead, told me we would celebrate next weekend. We never did. And I remember sitting in my room that night eating takeout alone, telling myself it was not a big deal, that birthdays happened every year. But what I did not realize then was that moments like that were not isolated. They were building something, teaching me how to disappear, how to expect less, how to accept that love, at least in my family, came with a ranking system, and I was not at the top of it. So when my mother told me not to come home, when she said those words without hesitation, it did not come out of nowhere. It came from years of decisions that had already placed me outside the circle. This was just the first time they stopped pretending I was still inside it. And sitting there in that restaurant, menu open but unread in front of me, I felt something shift in a way that was quiet but permanent. Not anger, not even sadness, just clarity, the kind that settles in slowly and changes how you see everything that came before it. Because for the first time, I was not asking what I had done wrong. I was asking a different question entirely. What if this was never about me at all? What if I was not the problem they had spent years trying to fix, but the person they had simply never chosen to see? And as that thought settled in, I realized something else. Something that would matter more than I understood in that moment. If they had spent my entire life choosing not to choose me, then maybe, just maybe, I did not have to keep choosing them either. The server came by a few minutes after I sat down, a polite smile that did not quite reach her eyes, the kind of look people give when they are trying not to show pity. "Just one tonight?" she asked, and I nodded, forcing a small smile like this was normal, like I chose this, like sitting alone on Thanksgiving in a restaurant filled with families was something people did on purpose. She handed me a menu and placed a basket of bread on the table, the smell of roasted turkey and warm butter filling the air in a way that felt almost cruel, because it reminded me of everything I did not have. I opened the menu but did not read a single word. My attention kept drifting to the table beside me. It was impossible not to notice them. They were loud in the way only comfortable families are, not obnoxious, just unfiltered, conversations overlapping, someone laughing too hard at a joke that probably was not that funny, an older woman at the head of the table directing the flow of dishes, like she had done it 1,000 times, a man in his 60s pouring wine while teasing a younger guy about something I could not quite catch, 2 kids passing rolls back and forth under the table until their mother gently tapped one of them on the shoulder without even looking, and the whole thing felt effortless, like belonging was just something that existed for them without effort, without negotiation, without conditions. I tried not to stare. I really did, but it was like watching something I had spent my whole life trying to understand from a distance, something I had seen in movies, in other people's lives, but never quite experienced in a way that felt real. And the worst part was not the envy. It was the realization that this was what normal looked like. This was what it was supposed to feel like to sit at a table with people who chose you without hesitation. My phone buzzed suddenly, and my heart jumped before I could stop it. I reached for it too quickly, like my body still believed it might be them, that maybe they had changed their minds, that maybe there was a message saying come home, but it was just a promotional email, 20% off holiday sales. And I let out a breath I did not realize I had been holding, placing the phone face down on the table, so I would not have to see it stay silent again. I told myself I should order something, that I should at least go through the motions of being here. But the idea of eating alone in that moment felt heavier than hunger, like every bite would just remind me of what I was missing. So I sat there, hands folded in my lap, pretending to read the menu while my thoughts moved somewhere else entirely, to the version of me that used to believe if I just tried harder, if I was more understanding, more patient, less complicated, maybe one day things would be different. Maybe one day I would be the one they chose without being asked. But that version of me felt distant now, like someone I used to know. Someone who had not yet learned that effort does not change how people value you. The laughter from the table next to me rose again, and this time I caught a few words, something about a story from years ago. The older woman shaking her head while smiling. "You have been telling that wrong for 20 years, she said, and the man laughed, raising his glass like he had no intention of correcting it, and I felt something shift again. Something small but noticeable, because it was not just the laughter, it was the way they looked at each other, the ease, the history, the understanding that did not need to be explained, and before I could stop myself, I glanced over just a little longer than I should have, and that is when the older woman noticed me. Our eyes met for a brief second, and I immediately looked away, heat rising to my face, embarrassed at being caught watching, but a moment later, I felt something unexpected, a pause in their conversation, a slight shift in the energy at their table, and then I heard a chair move. I looked up again, and the older woman was standing, her expression soft but certain, like she had already made a decision before saying a single word. She took a step toward my table, and for a second I froze, unsure of what was happening, unsure if I had done something wrong. But then she spoke, her voice warm in a way that felt unfamiliar and strangely comforting at the same time. "Honey, I hope you do not mind me asking, but are you here by yourself tonight?" And I nodded slowly, unsure of where this was going. "Yes," I said, my voice quieter than I intended, and she glanced back at her table for just a moment before looking at me again. "Well," she said, with a small smile that reached her eyes this time, "no one should spend Thanksgiving alone." And before I could respond, before I could overthink it, before I could default to the version of myself that politely declines and says I am fine even when I am not, she gently gestured toward their table. "Why do not you come sit with us?" And just like that, the moment I had been observing from a distance, the thing I thought belonged to other people was suddenly extended to me, and I sat there for a second, caught between instinct and possibility, because everything in me had been trained to say no, to not impose, to not take up space where I had not been explicitly invited, but this was an invitation, clear and simple, no conditions, no hesitation, and I realized in that moment that I had a choice. One that felt bigger than just moving from one table to another, a choice between staying in the role I had always played or stepping into something I did not fully understand yet, and for the first time in a long time, I did not overanalyze it, I did not question whether I deserved it, I just nodded slowly at first, then a little more certain. "Okay," I said, and as I stood up and picked up my plate, walking the few steps to their table, I had no idea that this small decision, this simple yes, was about to change the entire direction of my life in ways I could not yet see. For a moment, everything went quiet inside me as I stepped toward their table, like my body had not caught up to what was happening yet, like I was crossing an invisible line I had never been allowed to cross before, and I became suddenly aware of every small movement. The way my hands held the edge of my plate just a little too tightly, the way my shoulders felt stiff, like I was trying not to take up too much space even as I was being invited into it. The older woman pulled out a chair beside her with a gentle ease. "Right here, sweetheart," she said, and I sat down slowly, still half expecting someone to realize this had been a mistake, that I did not actually belong here, but no one hesitated, no one questioned it. The conversation paused just long enough for introductions and then picked up again as if I had always been part of it. "I am Margaret Caldwell," the woman said, placing a warm hand lightly on my arm for a brief second, not intrusive, just present. "And this is my husband, Richard." She nodded toward the man who had been pouring wine earlier. He smiled in a way that felt grounded, steady, like someone who had spent a lifetime making people feel at ease. "Nice to meet you, Hannah," he said, already using my name like it mattered, like I mattered, and one by one, the others introduced themselves, their son Daniel and his wife Claire, their daughter Lisa, and the two kids who were now watching me with open curiosity but no judgment, just interest, like I was something new, not something out of place. And that difference, that small but significant shift in how I was being seen, hit me harder than I expected, because I realized I was not being evaluated here. I was simply being included. A plate was placed in front of me before I even reached for anything. Someone passed the mashed potatoes. Someone else offered cranberry sauce. "You have to try this. It is Margaret's recipe," Claire said, smiling in a way that felt genuine, not polite, not forced, and I found myself nodding, accepting, letting them serve me without feeling like I needed to justify my presence or earn my place at the table, which was something I had never experienced before. Not like this, not without conditions attached. The conversation moved easily, stories overlapping, laughter coming naturally, and at first I stayed quiet, listening more than speaking, falling back into the role I knew best, the observer, the one who watches and adapts. But something felt different here because every time I spoke, even just a small comment, they listened, really listened, not waiting for their turn to talk, not dismissing what I said, not redirecting the attention elsewhere, just listening. And it was such a simple thing, something so basic, but it felt unfamiliar enough that I noticed it immediately, like stepping into a space where the rules were different in a way I did not yet fully understand. At one point, Margaret turned to me and asked, "So, Hannah, what do you do?" And I hesitated for just a second, not because I did not know the answer, but because I was used to how that question usually went. A brief nod, a polite acknowledgement, and then the conversation moving on to something more interesting. But I answered anyway. "I am a pediatric nurse." And instead of the usual quick response, her expression softened, her eyes focusing in a way that told me she was actually taking that in. "That must take a special kind of heart," she said quietly, and there was no exaggeration in her tone, no performance, just a simple recognition of something I had spent years doing without ever hearing it described that way. And for a moment, I did not know what to say, because I was not used to being seen through that lens, not used to having something about me acknowledged, without comparison, without being measured against someone else. It is important to me," I finally said, my voice a little steadier than I expected, and she nodded like that was enough, like I did not need to explain further. The kids started telling me about their school, interrupting each other, arguing over small details that did not matter, and I found myself smiling without forcing it, asking questions, engaging in a way that felt natural instead of calculated. And as the evening went on, something inside me began to loosen, slowly at first, then more noticeably, like a tension I had been carrying for years was starting to fade without me having to consciously let it go. I did not check my phone again. I did not think about the empty seat at my parents' table. I did not replay the conversation with my mother in my head, because for the first time that day, I was not focused on what I had lost. I was focused on what was happening right in front of me. And that shift, that subtle but powerful redirection of my attention, changed the way the entire evening felt. At one point, Richard raised his glass slightly and said, "To unexpected company," and everyone echoed it, smiling, glasses clinking lightly, and I felt something catch in my chest, not painful, just unfamiliar, like I was experiencing something I had not known how to name before, and I realized that this was what it felt like to be included without question, to be welcomed without conditions, to be part of something without having to earn it first. And it was such a simple moment, just a toast, just a shared table, but it carried a weight that I could not ignore because it stood in direct contrast to everything I had known before. When the meal started to wind down, I felt that old instinct creep back in, the one that tells you not to overstay, not to take more than what was offered, to leave before you become a burden. So I began to gather my things, thanking them more times than necessary, trying to express something I did not quite have the words for, but Margaret reached out lightly, stopping me before I could step away. "Hannah," she said, her voice gentle but certain. "We come here every Thanksgiving, same time, same table." She paused just long enough for me to look at her. Really look. "You are welcome to join us again anytime." And there it was, not just an invitation for that night, but something that extended beyond it, something that suggested continuity, consistency, something I had never associated with belonging before, and I nodded, not trusting myself to say more without my voice giving something away. "Thank you," I said quietly, and as I walked back out into the cold night air, the city lights reflecting off the pavement, I realized that something had shifted in a way I could not undo, because for the first time in a long time I had experienced what it felt like to be chosen, even if it was by strangers, even if it was just for a few hours. It was enough to show me that what I had accepted as normal all my life was not the only version of reality that existed. And once you see that, once you feel that difference, you cannot unsee it. You cannot go back to believing that being invisible is the same as being loved. The next morning felt quieter than it should have. Not because anything around me had changed, but because something inside me had. I woke up in the same apartment, the same narrow kitchen, the same half-empty fridge, but the weight that usually sat on my chest after moments like that was not there. Instead, there was something unfamiliar, something steady, like a question that had not fully formed yet but was no longer afraid to exist. I made coffee and sat by the window, watching people walk past on the sidewalk below, bundled up against the cold, moving with purpose toward places where they were expected, where someone would notice if they did not show up. And for the first time, I did not immediately think about what I did not have. I thought about what I had experienced the night before, the way a chair had been pulled out for me without hesitation, the way my name had been used like it mattered, the way no one had asked me to explain why I was alone before deciding whether I deserved to be included. And I realized that what made it so powerful was not the grand gesture. It was the consistency in the small ones, the way every person at that table had acted like my presence was normal, not temporary, not conditional, just normal, and that stayed with me longer than I expected. The days after Thanksgiving passed the way they always did, long shifts at the hospital, 12 hours on my feet, the constant rhythm of monitors, voices, footsteps in the hallway, but even there, something felt different. I noticed things I had not paid attention to before, the way parents sat beside their children's beds for hours, not because they were told to, but because they chose to, the way they held their hands, spoke softly, stayed present even when there was nothing to do but wait. And I realized that I had always been drawn to this work for a reason, because in a place where people showed up for each other without question, it felt closer to something I had been missing without fully understanding it. A few days later, I found myself thinking about that restaurant again, not in a nostalgic way, not replaying the moment like something finished, but in a way that felt open, unfinished, like something had started instead of ended. And before I could overthink it, before I could convince myself it would be strange or inappropriate, I did something I would not have done a week earlier. I went back. It was a Sunday afternoon, quieter than Thanksgiving, fewer people, softer conversations, but when I stepped inside, I felt that same warmth, that same sense of possibility, and for a moment I hesitated near the entrance, unsure of what I was expecting, unsure of what I was hoping for, but then I saw them, sitting at a table near the window. Not the same setup as before, smaller, more casual, but unmistakably them. Margaret noticed me first, her expression shifting almost instantly from recognition to something warmer, something that felt like genuine happiness. "Hannah," she said, as if my name had been waiting to be used again, and that alone was enough to erase any doubt I had about being there. "We were just talking about you," she added, and I smiled, a real one this time, not the kind I used to practice in mirrors to make sure it looked convincing. I was not sure if that was a good thing or a bad thing. I replied lightly, and Richard laughed, gesturing toward an empty chair. "It is a very good thing, sit down." And just like that, it happened again. The same effortless inclusion, no hesitation, no awkwardness, just space made for me like it was the most natural thing in the world. And I sat down, not carefully this time, not like I was trying to minimize my presence, but like I was allowed to be there, like I belonged there in a way I was still learning to accept. The conversation picked up easily. Stories from the week, small updates, nothing extraordinary, but that was the point. It did not have to be extraordinary to matter. It just had to be consistent. And over the next few weeks, that consistency began to take shape in ways I had never experienced before. A text from Margaret checking in after a long shift, an invitation to join them for a Sunday lunch, a quick call from Lisa asking if I wanted to come by for coffee. None of it dramatic, none of it overwhelming, just steady, intentional presence, and each time, I found myself saying yes a little more easily, a little less guarded, because I started to understand that this was not something I had to earn. It was something being offered, and that distinction changed everything. At the same time, something else began to fade, the instinct to reach out to my parents, to fill the silence they left with effort on my side. The phone calls I used to make just to maintain some version of connection became less frequent. Not out of anger, not out of resentment, but out of clarity, because I started to see that relationships are not sustained by one person trying hard enough. They are sustained by both sides choosing to show up. And for the first time, I stopped trying to compensate for what they were not giving. And as that shift settled in, I noticed something else. Something I had not expected. I did not feel the same urgency to be chosen by them anymore, because I was already being chosen somewhere else. in small, consistent ways that added up to something real, and one evening, about a month after Thanksgiving, I found myself sitting at Margaret and Richard's dining table, not in a restaurant this time, but in their home, a space filled with photographs, books, small details that told the story of a life built over time. And as we sat there, passing dishes, talking about nothing and everything at the same time, I realized that this no longer felt temporary. It did not feel like a kind gesture extended to a stranger. It felt like something that had roots, something that was growing quietly but steadily into something I could not yet fully define. And for the first time in my life, I allowed myself to consider a possibility I had never seriously entertained before. That family might not be something you are born into. It might be something you find, something you build, something that forms not because of obligation, but because people choose you, again and again, without needing to be asked. Time has a way of revealing what something really is, not in one dramatic moment, but in small repetitions that either hold steady or fall apart. And over the next few months, what I had started to build with the Caldwells did not fade the way I had expected it to. It did not stay in that category of nice experience or one-time kindness. It became something that showed up again and again in ways that felt consistent, reliable, and quietly transformative. Sunday lunches became routine, not scheduled weeks in advance, not formal, just a simple message from Margaret. "We are making roast chicken today. Come if you are free." And I would find myself saying yes without hesitation, not because I felt obligated, but because I wanted to be there, because being there felt easy in a way I had never associated with family before. And over time, I noticed something else changing, the way I moved in their space. At first, I would sit carefully, always aware of where I placed my hands, how much I spoke, how long I stayed, but gradually, without realizing it, that awareness softened. I would reach for dishes without asking, laugh a little louder, stay a little longer. After dinner, just talking about nothing in particular, and no one ever made me feel like I was crossing a line, because there was no line being drawn around me in the first place, and that absence of restriction created something I had never experienced, a sense of belonging that was not negotiated. It simply existed. One afternoon, about 3 months after that first Thanksgiving, I arrived at their house earlier than usual. Margaret was in the kitchen, flour on her hands, a recipe open on the counter, and when she saw me, she did not pause or shift into host mode. She simply said, "You're just in time, I need help with this," and handed me a mixing bowl like it was the most natural thing in the world, like I had always been part of this routine. And I stood there for a second, holding that bowl, realizing how significant that small moment was, because I was not being entertained, I was being included. There was a difference, a quiet but powerful one. And as we worked side by side, talking about nothing urgent, just small details about the week, I realized that this was what connection looked like when it was not performative. It was built in these ordinary moments that did not need to be documented or validated, they just needed to be experienced. At the same time, something else began to surface, something I had been avoiding without fully acknowledging it. The distance between me and my biological family was no longer just emotional. It was becoming practical, real, measurable in time and effort. Weeks would pass without a call, without a message, and for the first time, I did not rush to fill that silence. I did not send a text just to maintain the appearance of connection. I let it be what it was. And in doing that, I started to see the relationship more clearly, not as something that was temporarily strained, but as something that had always been one-sided. And one evening, my phone rang, my mother's name on the screen, and for a moment, I just stared at it, not with anticipation, not with anxiety, just with a kind of neutrality I had never felt before. I answered, "Hi, Mom," and her voice came through, casual, almost distracted. "Hey, I was just calling to see if you were coming home for Christmas." And there it was, no mention of Thanksgiving, no acknowledgement of what had happened, just a continuation, as if nothing had changed, as if time could reset without accountability. "I have not decided yet," I said, and there was a pause on the other end, short but noticeable. "Well, Olivia will be here, and we are planning something nice, so just let me know." And I almost laughed at how familiar that sounded, the subtle reminder of where the priority lay, the expectation that I would adjust around it, but something in me had shifted too much to respond the way I used to. "I will think about it," I replied, and we ended the call shortly after. And as I put my phone down, I noticed something important. I did not feel pulled in either direction. I did not feel the need to prove anything or fix anything. I just felt clear, and that clarity allowed me to make a decision based on what I wanted, not what was expected. And a few days later, I told Margaret about the call, not as a complaint, not as something I needed advice on, just as a fact, and she listened, really listened the way she always did, and when I finished, she did not tell me what to do. She did not offer solutions or judgments. She simply said, "You get to decide where you feel at home." And that sentence stayed with me because it reframed everything. It was not about obligation. It was about choice. And for most of my life, I had not realized that was an option, that I was allowed to choose where I belonged. And as December approached, that choice became more real, more immediate. The question was no longer abstract. It was practical. Where would I spend Christmas? And for the first time, the answer did not feel predetermined. It felt open. And on Christmas morning, I woke up in my own apartment. But instead of feeling empty, it felt intentional because I knew exactly where I was going. And when I arrived at the Caldwell's house, the door opened before I even knocked, Margaret standing there like she had been waiting. "Merry Christmas, Hannah," she said, and I stepped inside, into a space filled with warmth, with familiarity, with something that had been building quietly over the past few months into something real, something that no longer felt like an exception but like a foundation. And as I stood there, taking it in, I realized that this was not just about being invited in, it was about being expected. And there is a difference between those two things that changes everything, because being invited means you are welcome, but being expected means you are already part of it. And for the first time in my life, I understood what that felt like. The first time I realized that something inside me was truly changing was not during a big moment. It was not during a holiday or a dinner or anything that could be easily marked on a calendar. It was a quiet Tuesday evening after a long shift at the hospital. The kind of day where everything blurs together, where you move from one room to another without thinking, where your body keeps going even when your mind is tired. And I remember sitting in my car in the parking lot, hands resting on the steering wheel, not starting the engine right away, just sitting there in the silence. And for the first time in years, I did not feel the urge to call my parents, not to check in, not to update them, not to maintain that thread of connection I had always believed I was responsible for holding together. The thought crossed my mind briefly, out of habit more than anything, but it did not stay. It did not pull at me the way it used to. And that absence, that lack of urgency, felt more significant than any argument or confrontation ever could have, because it meant something fundamental had shifted. I was no longer trying to earn a place that had never been given to me. And that realization did not come with anger. It came with a kind of quiet acceptance that settled in slowly but completely. Later that week, I was at the Caldwell's house again. Nothing special, just a regular evening. Margaret was in the kitchen preparing dinner. Richard was in the living room reading, the television on low in the background, and I moved through the space without thinking, setting the table, opening cabinets, doing small things that once would have felt like overstepping, but now felt natural, like I was part of the rhythm of the house instead of a guest passing through it. And at one point, Margaret looked at me from across the counter, her expression thoughtful, not concerned, just observant. "You seem lighter," she said, not as a question, just a statement, and I paused for a second, considering that, because I had not consciously noticed it myself until she said it out loud. But once she did, I realized she was right. "I think I stopped waiting," I replied slowly, the words forming as I spoke them, and she nodded like she understood exactly what I meant without needing me to explain further, because sometimes the biggest changes are the ones that do not need to be justified. They just need to be acknowledged. And that night, as we sat down for dinner, I found myself fully present in a way I had not been before, not dividing my attention between what was happening and what was missing, not carrying that background noise of disappointment that had followed me for so long, just present, engaged, part of something that felt steady and real. And it was in that steadiness that something else began to surface. A question I had been avoiding, not because I did not know the answer, but because I was not ready to face what it would mean. What did it say about me, about my life, if the place I felt most at home was not the one I was born into, but the one I had found by accident? And more importantly, what did it mean if I chose to lean into that instead of pulling away from it? Because there was still a part of me, small but persistent, that held on to the idea that family was supposed to be permanent, that no matter what happened, you stayed connected, you kept trying, you did not replace it, you fixed it. But the more time I spent with the Caldwells, the more I understood that what I had been calling family all my life had not been functioning like one. It had been an idea, an expectation, something I kept trying to live up to without ever receiving the same effort in return. And one evening, that internal conflict came to the surface in a way I could not ignore. I was sitting at the kitchen table after dinner, Margaret clearing dishes, the house settling into that quiet that comes after a shared meal. And I said it before I could talk myself out of it. "Does it feel wrong?" I asked, and she turned slightly, looking at me with that same steady attention she always had. "What does?" she replied, and I hesitated for just a second, but then I said it anyway, feeling more at home here than I ever did with my own family. And the words hung there for a moment, not heavy, just honest, and she did not respond immediately. She set the plate down in the sink, dried her hands slowly, and then came to sit across from me, not rushing, not reacting, just being present. "No," she said simply, her voice calm, certain. "It does not feel wrong. It feels true." And something about the way she said that, without hesitation, without needing to soften it, settled something inside me that I had been struggling to articulate, because it removed the idea that this was something I needed to justify or feel guilty about. It reframed it as something valid, something real. And I realized then that the conflict I had been feeling was not about loyalty, it was about permission. I had never given myself permission to accept a different version of what family could look like, and now that I was, it felt both freeing and unfamiliar at the same time. "You're not replacing anything," she continued gently, as if she could see where my thoughts were going. "You are choosing what feels like home." And I sat there, letting that sink in, because it shifted the narrative in a way I had not considered before. This was not about losing one thing and gaining another. It was about recognizing what had already been missing and allowing something new to take its place without labeling it as wrong. And that night, as I drove home, I felt that clarity again, stronger this time, more defined, like a line had been drawn not between two families, but between two versions of myself. The one who kept waiting to be chosen, and the one who had finally started choosing for herself. And for the first time, I knew exactly which one I wanted to be. The shift did not happen all at once. It did not arrive with a single decision or a dramatic declaration. It unfolded slowly over the next year in a series of moments so ordinary that anyone else might have overlooked them. But for me, each one carried weight, because it reinforced something I was still learning to trust, that this was not temporary, that this was not something that would disappear the moment I stopped proving myself useful or agreeable. It was something that held steady even when I was tired, distracted, or simply quiet, and that consistency began to build something deeper than comfort. It built trust, real trust, the kind that does not come from words but from repetition, from showing up again and again without needing to be asked. And it showed up in ways I had never experienced before, like the time I got called into an unexpected double shift at the hospital, 14 hours back to back. And I had not eaten since early morning. My phone buzzed during a quick break, and it was a message from Margaret. "You left your scarf here yesterday. I am dropping it off." And I smiled at the screen because I had not even realized I had left it behind. And when I got home that night, exhausted, the scarf was folded neatly on my doorstep with a small container of homemade soup beside it, still warm, and there was no note explaining it, no expectation of thanks, just a quiet act of care that assumed I might need it. And that assumption, that awareness of me even when I was not present, felt more meaningful than any grand gesture I had ever received. And over time, those moments accumulated, not in a way that felt overwhelming, but in a way that felt steady, reliable, like something I could lean on without fear of it disappearing. And somewhere in the middle of that, something else began to change. The way I thought about myself, because for most of my life I had measured my worth through comparison, through absence, through what I was not given. But in this new space, that measurement stopped making sense, because I was not being compared to anyone, I was being accepted as I was, and that shifted something fundamental. It allowed me to see myself without the constant background of not being enough, and that clarity started to reflect in other parts of my life. At work, I spoke up more during team meetings, not because I had suddenly become more confident, but because I no longer felt like my voice was something that needed to be minimized. I took on a leadership role in the pediatric unit, something I had hesitated to do before because I did not trust my own authority, and when my supervisor told me, "You have a way of making people feel safe that is rare," I did not deflect it, I accepted it, quietly but fully, because I had started to believe it might be true, and that belief did not come from inside me alone. It came from being in an environment where I was consistently treated as someone who mattered, and that is what changed everything, not a single moment, but a pattern of moments that reinforced a new version of reality, and as that new reality took shape, the old one began to lose its hold, not through confrontation, not through conflict, but through absence. The calls from my parents became occasional, then rare, then almost non-existent, and when they did come, they felt distant, transactional updates about Bolivia, about events I was not part of, invitations that felt more like obligations than genuine interest, and for the first time, I did not feel the need to close that gap. I let it remain because I understood now that connection cannot be built on one side alone. And that realization freed me from a responsibility I had carried for years without questioning it, and one evening, nearly a year after that first Thanksgiving, I was sitting at the Caldwell dining table again, the same place that had once felt unfamiliar now as natural as my own kitchen, and Margaret placed a photo album in front of me. "We were going through old pictures," she said, and as I opened it, I saw decades of their lives captured in moments both big and small, birthdays, graduations, vacations, everyday snapshots that told a story of time spent together, of memories built layer by layer. And as I turned the pages, I noticed something that caught me off guard. There were new photos tucked into the back, more recent ones, and I recognized myself in them. Small moments from the past year, a picture of me standing in the kitchen holding a mixing bowl, another of all of us sitting around the table, laughing at something I could not quite remember, and I paused, my fingers resting on the edge of the page, because this was something I had never seen before, myself included in someone else's history, not as an afterthought, not at the edge of the frame, but fully present, part of the moment, part of the story, and I felt that familiar shift again, that quiet realization that something real had formed, something that was no longer temporary, no longer undefined. And I looked up at Margaret, unsure of what to say, because there are moments that do not translate easily into words, but she understood anyway, she always did. "You are part of this now," she said simply, and there was no hesitation in her voice, no uncertainty, just a statement of fact. And for the first time, I did not question it. I did not look for conditions or exceptions. I just accepted it, because it matched what I had been experiencing all along. Not something forced, not something fragile, but something steady, something that had been built over time in a way that could not be undone by a single moment or a single decision. And as I sat there, looking at those photos, I realized that this was no longer about filling a gap left by something else. It was about recognizing what had been created in its place, something that stood on its own, something that did not need to be compared or justified. It just needed to be acknowledged. And in that acknowledgement, I found something I had not known I was allowed to have, a sense of belonging that was not borrowed, not temporary, but fully mine. It was not until the second year that everything became undeniable, not because something dramatic happened, but because what had been quietly building could no longer be explained as coincidence or temporary kindness. It had become structure, something with weight and permanence, and I realized that the way the Caldwells treated me had crossed a line from inclusion into something deeper, something that carried responsibility, intention, and choice. It started on an ordinary afternoon in early spring. I had just finished a long shift and stopped by their house without calling first, something I never would have done before, but when Margaret opened the door, she did not look surprised. She smiled like she had expected me all along. "Good, you are here," she said, stepping aside to let me in, and there was no question of why I had come, no need to explain, just an assumption that I belonged in that space. And that assumption had started to feel natural instead of borrowed. Later that evening, after dinner, Richard asked if I could stay for a bit, his tone casual but deliberate, and I nodded, not thinking much of it at first. We moved into the living room, the light softer, the atmosphere quieter, and Margaret sat across from me with a folder in her hands, not formal, not intimidating, just present, and I felt a small shift in the air, not tension, but intention, like something important was about to be said. "Hannah," she began, her voice steady, "there is something we have been thinking about for a while. And I sat a little straighter, not out of fear, but out of attention because I could tell this mattered to her, to both of them. Richard leaned forward slightly, his hands resting together. "We want to talk to you about something that is not small, so we want you to take your time with it." And there was no pressure in his tone, just clarity. And that alone made me listen differently, because I was not being asked to react. I was being invited to consider. Margaret opened the folder and slid it gently across the table toward me, and I looked down, seeing official documents, structured, precise, legal language that immediately told me this was not symbolic. This was real. "We spoke with an attorney," she continued, watching my reaction carefully but without urgency, "and we learned that adult adoption is something that can be done legally." And for a second, I did not respond, not because I did not understand the words, but because I did, and the meaning settled in slowly, layer by layer. "We are not asking you to decide anything right now," Richard added, his voice calm. "We just want you to know that if this is something you would ever want, we would be honored to make it official." Official. That word carried more weight than anything else they had said, because it shifted this from something emotional into something recognized, something documented, something that could not be dismissed or undone by interpretation. And I looked down at the papers again, my name printed there alongside theirs, structured in a way that placed me within their family, not as a guest, not as an addition, but as a part of it, legally, permanently, and I felt something rise in my chest that I had to steady before speaking. "Why?" I asked quietly, not because I doubted them, but because I needed to hear it in their words. Margaret's expression softened, not with pity, but with something deeper, something certain. "Because family is not about who you are born to," she said. "It is about who shows up, and you have shown up for us, and we want to do the same for you." And there it was, not framed as charity, not framed as something I needed, but as something mutual, something chosen on both sides. And that distinction changed everything, because it meant this was not about filling a gap. It was about recognizing a connection that already existed, and for a moment I did not know what to say, because this was bigger than anything I had allowed myself to expect, bigger than anything I had even considered as a possibility. I thought about the years I had spent trying to earn a place in my own family, trying to be enough in ways that were never clearly defined, and now I was being offered something that did not require earning something. That was based on presence, on consistency, on choice, and that contrast was almost overwhelming. "I do not know what to say," I admit it, my voice steady but honest, and Margaret reached across the table, placing her hand lightly over mine. "Not to guide, not to push, just to connect. You do not have to say anything right now," she said gently. "This is not a decision you make in one moment. It is something you sit with." And I nodded, because that made sense, because this deserved that kind of consideration. Not because I was unsure of them, but because I needed to fully understand what it meant for me, what it meant to accept something that would redefine how I saw my own life. That night, I drove home with the folder resting on the passenger seat, unopened since leaving their house, not because I was avoiding it, but because I wanted to feel it first, to sit with the reality of what had been offered without immediately analyzing it. And as I sat in my apartment later, the quiet around me different from what it used to be, I realized that the question was not whether I wanted this. The question was whether I was ready to accept it, because accepting it meant acknowledging something I had spent years trying to avoid, that the family I had been born into had not chosen me in the way that mattered, and that this new family had, not out of obligation, not out of expectation, but out of intention. And that kind of truth does not arrive quietly. It reshapes everything. And as I finally opened the folder, reading through the documents, seeing the structure, the clarity, the permanence of it all, I understood that this was not just an offer, it was a turning point, one that would define not just my relationship with them, but my understanding of what family actually meant. And for the first time, I allowed myself to consider a future where belonging was not something I was still trying to find, but something I had already been given. For 3 days, I did not touch the folder again, not because I was unsure of what it meant, but because I understood exactly what it meant, and that kind of clarity requires space, not reaction. I went to work, followed my routine, moved through my shifts with the same precision I always had, but underneath it, there was a steady awareness that something in my life had shifted direction, not abruptly, not dramatically, but definitively, and I found myself observing my own thoughts more carefully than usual, noticing what pulled at me and what no longer did, because for years, my decisions had been shaped by a need to maintain connection with my biological family, even when that connection gave very little back. But now, standing at this point, I realized that the decision in front of me was not about replacing anything. It was about recognizing what had already been built, and whether I was willing to honor it fully. On the fourth day, I called Margaret and asked if I could come by. Her response was immediate, not in words, but in tone. "Of course," she said, like the question itself was unnecessary. And when I arrived, nothing about the house felt different, which somehow made the moment more significant, because it meant that whatever I was about to say would not change the way they treated me. The decision was mine alone, not something they were waiting on to define how they showed up for me. We sat at the same table where the folder had been placed days earlier, and for a moment, I just looked at them, really looked, at the quiet steadiness in Richard's posture, at the warmth in Margaret's expression that had never once felt conditional. And I realized that I was not trying to convince myself of anything. I was acknowledging something that had already proven itself over time. "I read everything," I said finally, my voice calm, not hesitant, and Margaret nodded, giving me space to continue without interruption. "And I think I already know what this is," I added, because the truth was, this was not about paperwork. It was about recognition, about putting a name to something that had been forming for a long time. Richard leaned forward slightly, not to pressure, just to listen more closely. "It feels like making something official that has already been real," I said, and Margaret's eyes softened in a way that told me she understood exactly what I meant. "Yes," she replied quietly, "that is exactly what it is." And in that moment, whatever hesitation I might have had dissolved, not because the decision was easy, but because it was clear. "Then I want to do it," I said, and the words felt steady, grounded, like they belonged to me in a way that decisions in the past had not. There was no dramatic reaction, no sudden shift in the room, just a quiet acknowledgement. Richard exhaled softly, a small smile forming. Margaret reached across the table, her hand resting over mine again, not to celebrate, but to connect, to confirm something that did not need to be made bigger than it already was. Because the significance of it did not come from the moment. It came from everything that had led to it. The next few weeks moved with a kind of calm purpose. Meetings with the attorney, documents reviewed and signed, details clarified with precision, every step structured, intentional. And what struck me most was how natural it all felt. Not because it was simple, but because it aligned with something I had already accepted internally. The legal process did not create the relationship, it recognized it. And that distinction mattered because it meant that nothing about how we interacted changed. There was no shift in tone, no new expectations, just a continuation of what had already been there. Only now it carried a different kind of weight. A formal acknowledgement that what we had built was not temporary, not undefined, but real in a way that extended beyond emotion into structure. And on the day everything was finalized, we sat in a small office, the kind of place designed for efficiency rather than sentiment, the attorney explaining each step with clarity, the documents laid out in front of us, precise, structured, and when it was time to sign, I did not hesitate. I wrote my name where indicated, not as an act of change, but as an act of confirmation, and when it was done, when the final signature was placed and the documents were collected, there was a moment of quiet, not dramatic, not overwhelming, just still, like something had settled into place exactly where it belonged. The attorney shook our hands, offered a formal congratulations, and we stepped outside into the afternoon light. And for a second, I just stood there, taking in the simplicity of it, because nothing around me had changed. The street looked the same, the air felt the same, but something fundamental had shifted in a way that could not be undone. "How do you feel?" Margaret asked gently, and I considered the question carefully, not rushing to answer, because I wanted to be accurate, like I stopped waiting. I said finally, echoing the realization I had come to weeks earlier, but this time it felt complete, finished, and she smiled, not surprised, just understanding, and as we walked to the car, Richard placed a hand lightly on my shoulder, a small gesture, but one that carried a sense of certainty, of presence, and I realized that this was what it meant. To be chosen in a way that was not temporary, not conditional, but intentional and sustained. And later that evening, as I sat in my apartment, the signed documents placed neatly on the table, I thought about the path that had brought me here, not in terms of what I had lost, but in terms of what I had found, because for the first time, the story did not feel like one of absence, it felt like one of alignment, like everything had led to this point not by accident, but by a series of choices. Some made for me, some made by me, And this decision was fully mine, and it marked the moment where I stopped trying to belong somewhere I was not seen and fully stepped into a place where I was not just welcomed, but recognized as part of something real. The first time I heard from my biological parents after everything was finalized, it did not come with any awareness of what had changed. It came the same way it always had, casual, convenient, as if time had not moved forward without them. It was a phone call on a Thursday evening. I had just gotten home, still in my scrubs, keys barely set down on the counter when my phone rang, and for a second, I considered letting it go to voicemail, not out of avoidance, but because I no longer felt the urgency to respond immediately. But I answered anyway. "Hi, Mom," I said, my voice steady, and she did not waste time on small talk. "Hannah, we need to talk about your wedding," she said, and I paused, not because I was surprised, but because of the assumption embedded in that sentence, the certainty that this was something they were part of without question. "What about it?" I asked, keeping my tone neutral, and she continued, "We need to start planning. Your father will handle the venue, and Olivia has some ideas for the guest list." And I almost smiled at how familiar that sounded, the same pattern, decisions being made around me, not with me, but this time something was different. This time I was not stepping into that role. "I've already planned most of it," I replied, and there was a brief silence on the other end. Not long, but enough to register. "Well, you should have told us," she said, her tone tightening slightly. "This is something the family should be involved in." And that word, family, landed differently now, not because it had changed, but because my understanding of it had. "I am involving my family," I said calmly, and this time, the silence lasted longer, heavier. "What does that mean?" she asked, and I could hear the shift, the beginning of something she did not yet understand. "It means the people who are part of my life. The ones who have been there are the ones involved," I answered, choosing my words carefully, not to soften them, but to keep them clear, and she let out a small breath, one that carried more frustration than confusion. "Hannah, do not make this complicated. We are your parents." And there it was, the statement that had always ended every discussion, the assumption of authority, of permanence, but this time, it did not land the same way. "You are my biological parents," I said quietly, and I did not raise my voice. I did not add emotion. I just let the words sit there because they were enough, and on the other end, I could feel the shift, the realization beginning to take shape. "What is that supposed to mean?" she asked, her tone sharper now, but I did not react to it because I was not trying to argue. I was stating something that had already been decided. "It means things have changed," I replied, and I left it at that, because this was not a conversation that needed to be forced into understanding in one moment. It was something they would either accept or not, and for the first time, their reaction did not determine how I felt about it. The call ended shortly after, not with resolution, but with distance, and I set my phone down, noticing that I did not feel shaken. I did not feel pulled back into the old pattern of trying to fix or explain. I just felt steady because nothing they said changed what had already been built. The weeks leading up to the wedding moved forward with a kind of quiet certainty. The details coming together, the guest list finalized, the venue set, everything aligned with the life I was actually living, not the one that had been expected of me. And on the day of the wedding, everything felt exactly as it should, not perfect in a dramatic sense, but grounded, intentional, real. The room filled with people who knew me, who had been part of my life in ways that mattered, and as I stood just outside the main hall, waiting for the ceremony to begin, I could hear the low hum of conversation, the movement of guests taking their seats, and I felt calm. Not because there were no complications, but because I knew exactly who I was walking into that room as. Not someone trying to prove anything, not someone waiting to be acknowledged, but someone who had already been chosen. And when the music began, I stepped forward, my arm linked with Richard's, Margaret walking just behind us, and the moment we entered the room, I saw it. The reaction, subtle but unmistakable, my biological parents seated toward the back, not in the front where they had likely expected to be, their expressions shifting as they took in what was happening, not with dramatic confrontation, but with quiet realization, because the truth was not being announced, it was being shown. And as we moved down the aisle, as Richard walked beside me with that same steady presence he had always had, as Margaret's hand rested lightly on my shoulder just before I stepped forward on my own, everything aligned in a way that required no explanation. Because this was the outcome of every choice that had been made over the past 5 years, every moment of consistency, every act of presence, every decision to show up, and when the officiant spoke, when the ceremony continued, there was no need to define anything out loud, because it was already clear to everyone in that room, who stood with me, who had been there, who had chosen me. And as I reached the end of the aisle, as I looked out at the faces of the people who were part of my life, I understood something fully for the first time, that belonging is not something that is assigned, it is something that is built, and when it is built with intention, with consistency, with care, it does not need to be defended or explained. It simply exists, undeniable, steady, and completely real. The rest of the evening unfolded without interruption, not because nothing happened, but because everything that mattered had already been set into place long before that day. The ceremony moved forward with a kind of quiet certainty, each moment building on the last in a way that felt grounded rather than overwhelming. And as I stood there, exchanging vows, listening to the words that marked the beginning of something new, I realized that this moment was not defined by who was missing, it was defined by who was present, and that distinction changed everything because for most of my life, I had measured important moments by absence, by who did not show up, by what was not given, but standing there I could not feel that absence the same way anymore because it no longer held the same weight, it no longer defined the experience. What defined it was the presence of people who had chosen to be there consistently, intentionally, without hesitation, and when the ceremony ended, when the room shifted into celebration, conversations filling the space, laughter rising naturally, I moved through it with a sense of ease I had never experienced at a family gathering before, not monitoring, not adjusting, not trying to anticipate what version of myself was expected, just existing as I was, and that freedom, that absence of self-editing, was something I did not take lightly. It was something I had learned over time, built slowly through repeated moments of being accepted without condition, and at one point during the reception, I stepped outside for a moment, not to escape, but to take it in, the evening air cool against my skin, the sound of music and voices spilling out behind me, and I stood there looking out at the city lights, thinking not about what had led me here in terms of conflict, but in terms of clarity, because the truth was, nothing that had happened with my biological parents that day was unexpected. Their reactions, their distance, their confusion, all of it followed a pattern I had already come to understand, and for the first time, I did not feel the need to change that pattern. I did not feel the need to fix it or reinterpret it. I simply accepted it as what it was, and in doing so, I freed myself from the idea that closure needed to come from them, that understanding needed to be mutual for it to be valid, because it did not. My understanding was enough, my experience was enough, and as I stood there, Margaret joined me, not with urgency, not with concern, just with presence, standing beside me in the same quiet way she always had. "You okay?" she asked softly, and I nodded, because I was, more than okay. I was steady in a way that felt unfamiliar but right. "I am," I said, and after a moment I added, "I think I finally understand something." And she turned slightly, giving me space to continue. "I used to think that being chosen was something I had to earn," I said, my voice calm, not heavy, just reflective, "but it is not, it is something people either do or they do not." And she smiled, not because it was new information to her, but because she recognized what it meant for me to say it out loud. "Yes," she said simply, and we stood there for a moment longer, not needing to fill the silence because the understanding was already there. And when I went back inside, the room felt the same, but I moved through it differently, not as someone who is still searching for her place, but as someone who had already found it. And later that night, as the reception came to an end, as guests began to leave, as the space slowly emptied, I found myself standing near the entrance, saying goodbye, thanking people for being there, and when I reached my biological parents, there was no confrontation, no dramatic exchange, just a brief moment of acknowledgement, my mother's expression uncertain, my father quieter than usual, and for a second, I saw something there that I had not allowed myself to see before, not regret exactly, but a recognition that something had shifted beyond their control, that the dynamic they had always relied on no longer existed in the same way, and I did not need to say anything to confirm that, because it was already evident. "Congratulations," my mother said, her voice measured, and I nodded. "Thank you," I replied, and that was enough. because this moment was not about rewriting the past, it was about acknowledging the present, and as they stepped away, I did not feel the urge to follow, to extend the interaction, to fill the space with something more. I let it end where it naturally did, and that was something I had never done before, allowing an interaction to close without trying to reshape it into something it was not. And as the last guests left, as the lights dimmed, as the day came to a quiet close, I stood in that space one last time, taking it in, not as an ending, but as a confirmation, because everything that had happened that day, every detail, every interaction, every presence and absence, had reinforced something I now understood fully, that family is not defined by who is supposed to be there. It is defined by who actually shows up, who stays, who chooses you consistently over time. And as I walked out into the night, no longer carrying the weight of what had been missing, but grounded in what had been built, I realized that I was not leaving anything behind. I was stepping fully into something that had been forming all along, something that did not need to be justified or defended, something that simply was, and in that I found a kind of peace that did not come from resolution but from acceptance, acceptance of what had been, what was, and what I had chosen moving forward, and for the first time, that choice felt complete.